So with that, this entire workshop is going to be taught about Figma inside of Figma using Figma, right? So let's actually hop over to just kind of, we're going to spend all day in this interface, right? Let's figure out what's going on. Because it is, maybe you all are better people than me, but typically what I do when I find a new tool is I just pretend that I know what I'm doing and then realize that I don't actually know what any of these options are, what any of these tools are, and then find myself underwater and confused and sad, usually before a deadline. So let's not do that. Let's actually get the lay of the land, understand what's going on here, and that way we're coming here from a place of confidence. The middle part is easy. The middle part is my design, my user interface, my prototype, my what have you. Right, that's done. We've got a quarter of all the different kind of pieces here handled. Along the top, we have a toolbar. Here you've got a little Figma menu that has a whole bunch of options. We will dig into this over the course of our day together. You've got two tools for moving stuff and scaling stuff. Moving moves things. Scaling makes things bigger and smaller. You can also make stuff bigger and smaller with the Move tool, and we'll talk about the difference in a second. Probably the most important tool that we're going to use today is this idea of a frame. A frame is any kind of container that holds stuff, right? It's a div. It's a div, right? It's going to be the thing that has other elements within it. Obviously, you can have a width and a height, so on and so forth, right? In the same way that you would use a div, or if you're more enlightened, a section tag or something along those lines, or the correct semantic HTML, it is the given container for other things. So our screen, when we get to prototyping, that's a frame, right? It's very tempting to just go into these other tools here and just draw rectangles. But rectangles are just squares. They don't hold things. They're not containers. They're just squares, and you will eventually be sad. When I implemented this course page, I purposely did bad things. That's partially why it took me so long, right? It's actually a lot easier to go from a screenshot to a Figma design, but I was purposely trying to do it poorly and the bad way so we could refactor it a little bit. But frames are kind of the most important tool that we're going to use. We've got a pen and a pencil that we're not going to touch. Text, the pen and pencil for drawing vector art, which nobody wants to see me do, right? Text, that seems important. Most of our UIs have some amount of text in them. The text lets you type. We've got this kind of hand that we can kind of move around as well. You can always hold the space bar and move too. And then we've got some commenting features as well. Along the top, some of these change as we're moving around. We've got the ability to make components. Components are reusable pieces of our UI, right? The metaphor here is rather than copying and pasting the same HTML all over the place, if you're using React, for instance, you might make a component. The word means roughly the same thing in Figma, right? Mask, again, is for creating vector art, as well as subtracting, adding. You can also do full-on vector art in here as well. You can, I can't kind of thing. The tool will allow you to, again. You can see collaborators, you might in a Google Docs or something along those lines. You can share it, so you can see everyone using it. You can give them edit access, so multiple people can work on a design at the same time, and they'll all see the latest and greatest version. You can also play through a prototype. So that's kind of everything along the top bar. Let's talk about this left side over here. So this is, you've got a series of pages, right? As we work through the content of this course, we're going to basically go down the list of pages one by one, jumping around occasionally, but kind of as we work through each page. And then over here, we have this list of basically all of the layers on the page, right? So this is basically everything happening on this page is kind of listed in this hierarchy, this tree-like structure as well. If you hover over something, you can kind of see there's a rectangle. It's highlighted over here and here as well. Assets are the reusable components. We're going to make a whole bunch. Right now, the only thing kind of included here is the raw materials I use to put together the course itself. And then on the right side is where the magic happens, right? This is where we can kind of tweak and adjust everything. So for instance, if I grab this tool here and I select this frame right here, you can see I can change the X and Y, the width and the height, the border radii, a bunch of other things as well. We will spend most of the day learning about everything in this right side panel, so don't fret. This is where most of the kind of adjusting and moving stuff happens, really in one of these two views right here. But there are two other tabs in here that I just want to kind of draw your attention to. Prototype, so tools like Sketch, for instance, in the past, I guess it's still in the present, Sketch exists, would allow you to do the design, and you use like Zeppelin or something else to like make a prototype that you could like interact with, right? This is usually really great because some of the really best designers I've worked with will make the full prototype, put it in front of customers before I build it, which is usually, yeah, I like to know that the thing I'm going to build is the thing that people like before I do it. I mean, I'm happy to rebuild it over and over and over again, as long as the paychecks keep coming. But you know, if you start building things people don't want, the paychecks tend to stop coming. So it allows you to actually create fully interactive prototypes that you can kind of put in front of users and play around with. And then inspect kind of is one of your very good friends for when you go to implement the design. It kind of gives you some of the high-level details. Like you could glean a lot of this information from kind of going through here, but this is a nice compact way to just let you see, like, OK, here's the width and the height of whatever I'm currently building, right? And again, the pixel width might not be the most important thing as you implement the web view, because it might be like, cool, responsive design is a thing, right? But it gives you a sense for some, at least the radii, the padding, and stuff along those lines helps you at least figure out what you're looking at without sitting there like counting pixels or guessing, right? There are previous tools where I have sat there and either like zoomed in and tried to count the number of pixels, or just tweak the CSS, look at both of them, tweak the CSS, look at both of them. I don't want to live like that, right? And so this panel helps you in that regard as well. And again, it will generate some of the CSS, or if you are building for iOS or Android, it will show you the like Swift code as well. I don't want to look at that ever again. So yeah, like next time you complain about CSS, just switch to one of those other tabs. It'll make you feel better about the web. And you can kind of see some of these different things here as well. Cool. So layers and frames and some of these kind of important pieces. A layer is basically a thing in Figma, right? In JavaScript, we might say like an object. Like everything, well, JavaScript has primitives, but like everything that's not a number or a Boolean or string is an object in JavaScript. So everything is basically a layer in some way, shape, or form, right? So we could go ahead and we could let's start with a rectangle. We could draw a rectangle. If you just click, you'll get about 100 by 100 rectangle. You can click and drag and create a rectangle of your choosing. One quick thing is you'll notice that after I draw the rectangle, it goes back to the move tool. If you hover over each tool here, you'll see that they have like a very easy keystroke that you can press. So if you want to get back to the rectangle tool, that's R. The frame is F. Move is V. I don't make the rules here. I just have to tell you about them. But the rectangle is R. That makes a lot of sense. So if I can just drag, and that's fun. I can also hold Shift and drag, and I will get a evenly spaced out one. If you start dragging, you're like, oh, I actually need one that's equal. You can start just holding Shift at that moment, and it will snap to one that is of equal width and height. What happens if you hold down Option while drawing one? Let's see. You'll see that it kind of grows, not just from the top and left down, but in both directions. Option on Mac OS, Alt on Windows. Let's hold them both down. And you can see that it is both even and growing in every direction at the same time. And if you started drawing it in the wrong space, actually, let's go with that. You can hold the space bar and move it around, and some combination of all these things. And depending on like how if you're a guitar player, maybe you can hit like all the keys all at once and find new fun combinations. But that's the kind of high level there as well. Selecting works just like you think it might. You can delete stuff as well. If you mess up, you can kind of change any of the properties along here also. So let's check this out. Like we said, a lot of these will give you proportion. You can hold space, so on and so forth. But when you have the move tool, you can grab it. You can move it around. You'll notice some guides are trying to help you out. We're going to talk a little bit more about alignment. If you find yourself like slamming on the left or right key to try to get stuff into the right place, let's talk. because there are probably better ways to handle that, and we will talk over the course of this as well. All right, so creating a frame is basically the same as creating a rectangle. This time we just hit the F key, and we can draw this frame. And you can see this frame has a white background by default. If you draw it inside of an existing frame, however, it will be transparent. So you can draw frames. You put frames inside of frames. You can see that when I put a frame in a frame, we get this nested structure on the sidebar. Right? Rectangles will just overlap. There's no idea of having a rectangle inside of a rectangle. It's just a shape. Other than like getting started for like a button or an input field, you probably almost always, like as a UI developer, you probably almost always want a frame, right? But the rectangles are there like if you need to do a particular shape, or if you're trying to like put together some kind of logo or something along those lines. You can use, like I said before, you can use them to get started with buttons or input fields or something where it is the shape of a rectangle, but you're probably going to end up turning it into a frame eventually. All right, so yeah, we talked about all of these different facts that you can move stuff as well. To select layers, there's a bunch of options that you have here. You can hold Shift to select multiple things at the same time. You can, if there's a layer inside of a layer that you need to get to, like at first you might end up with just the overall, the big box in this case, but if I really wanted to get that text layer, double-clicking will kind of like drill down into the nested layers, right? So first click. If you are hovering over something, and we'll kind of see this a little bit later, but I just want to put it in your brain now, that way when I repeat it, we've got something to hook onto. If you're trying to select something like, OK, this frame is clear, I want to select it, but like I'm not getting it, like holding Command will always kind of like help you. Command, or I guess Control on Windows, will help you get directly to whatever your mouse is over. So you can either skip the double clicking, or if you have a hard time like, hey, this thing is transparent and my mouse is kind of like going through it, you can hold Command and it will help you get to it a lot easier. All right, so we have a bunch of fun ways to kind of change sizes and align objects. As you saw before, like clicking and dragging, there will try to be some help here. And that'll work. The other thing that you can do is you can adjust these numbers. However, if you're like, I'm too tired for basic arithmetic, one thing that you can do is, let's say if I wanted to move this 64 pixels. Let's say 63 pixels. That way it's not as easy for me, right? I could sit there and I could do the math in my head. I could pull out a calculator. Or I can just say plus 63 and hit Enter, and it will move 63 pixels, right? Where this is also super interesting is if I have multiple things picked, you'll see it says mixed, right? Because there's a lot of x's and y-axes here. This will still work. It'll move everything 100 pixels. When we get to like the size of something, like let's say I want to take this image, you can also go to the width. Yeah, I can add numbers. I can subtract numbers.
Can you do percents with that, or is it just
That was the best question ever. I can also do percents with that. All right, so I can type in like 200% to the width, and it will double the width, right? So you can kind of like you can do multiplication if you want. You can do division. It all works the way you think that it works. There are some kind of tools for aligning things as well. Like I said, you can just sit there and try to get it right. One other quick, as long as we're holding down different keys while we're doing stuff, is sometimes you're like trying to get like just stuff on the like x-axis right, and you're worried that like you might, like these trackpads are really good these days, and you're worried that you might accidentally like move a pixel north or south. You can hold Shift, and you'll only kind of move along one axis unless you really like try, and it will jump to like the next thing it snaps to, but it'll kind of keep it straight along a given axis as well. You can also grab two things, and you've got these tools up here. So if, let's say I wanted them kind of on the same x-axis. I could either have them aligned in the center, and they'll kind of both move, so they share the similar kind of horizontal axis. I can align them to the topmost one. I could take these, and I can align them this way as well. One of the things Figma will try to help you with, if it can, you'll notice that like if it thinks like, hey, these are a bunch of objects that are almost like spaced out properly, you go ahead and hit that button. One of the things that we'll see later, but it's showing now, so I'm just going to show you, is you have these circular dots here. and these lines. These are when Figma has once you have at least 3 objects, it's hard to tell about even spacing with 2. With 3, it can kind of figure out what the spacing should be. And once they're evenly spaced, you can kind of adjust them both. The other thing you can do is grab this circle, and if you hold Command or I think Control on Windows, you can begin to swap them around as well. So like, hey, this was the topmost one. I just want to flip them. You can do that also. Yeah, and so yeah, and then there's tidy up, which is again like it tries to do both the horizontal and the vertical, and just arranging everything in a way that makes sense. Will it always get it right every time? Probably not, especially like if you have things that are roughly all the same size and should have been in a grid to begin with, you'll probably get it right. Here I've got like various different images of different sizes and different layers and stuff along those lines. It did a pretty good job. It'll get you most of the way there, and then you can kind of do the rest by hand and kind of adjust it a little bit more manually if you need to. Some of these options are here as well, as you can see in this lovely screenshot. And you can kind of pick whichever one you want to use. And again, it will try to do its best. Again, with very normalized stuff, it works better. It's kind of like working with data, right? When your data is normalized, it's easier to process. The same thing kind of applies here as well.